Now, the National Commission for Civic Education, NCCE, is launching a national dialogue on a survey report on violent extremism in Ghana at Cleaver House. Let's cross over live to that program, which is being moderated by Samson Ladi Anyanene. Do stay tuned in.
We have Madam Belinda Kopp, NAO, Ministry of Finance, to give us the opening prayer.
Amen.
Amen. Amen. Thank you very much, Madam Belinda. With the sponsorship of the European Union, this program is live on Joy FM and JoyNews and their social media handles, and NCCE social media handles, NCCGH. You can find us there, so watch. You can also participate by sending your comments, your questions, and all that throughout the session, because this is a national program and it borders on everybody in the country. For the program, we have our guests from institutions such as the Prison Service, the Fire Service, Information Services Department, Small Arms Commission, the Ghana Armed Forces, WANEP, YOKO, National Media Commission, Police Service, and others. If I have not mentioned you, all protocols observed. So I'd like to invite the chairman of NCCE, Ms. Jocelyn Nkrumah, to give us the welcome remarks. Let's give it up for her.
The representative of Her Excellency Diana Sconcia, Head of Delegation of the European Union, Mr. Christian Spoderick, Deputy Chairpersons of the National Commission for Civic Education, Commission members of the National Commission for Civic Education, Nime, Name, Nananom, representatives of political parties, distinguished panelists, and moderator, heads and representatives of security agencies, other state institutions, civil society organizations, academia, students, media, directors and staff of the National Commission for Civic Education. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning.
Good morning.
On behalf of the National Commission for Civic Education, I welcome all of you warmly to the launch of the survey report on violent extremism in the 10 borders of Ghana and this morning's national. Over the last 3 decades, the country has conducted 8 elections, which has seen a peaceful transition 3 times in change of government. As a country, we have enjoyed peace and stability for decades. And in no small measure, this has contributed to the foreign direct investments we see in our country, and it makes us the preferred choice of investment destinations in the sub-region. Undoubtedly, it has also brought us economic development. In recent times, has witnessed emergent trends of electoral violence and the use of arms by electoral thugs, referred as This has threatened our economic growth, our political stability, and overall our development. Our national unity and cohesion is equally threatened by secession from the Western Togoland. The security in the West African sub-regions, particularly fundamentalists operating in the Sahel region and along the northernmost border of Ghana, have diverse implications for our country's peace, stability, and sustainable development. As Herman Kahn said, a healthy and fully society must allocate resources to a variety of competing interests, all of which are more or less valid, but none of which should take precedence over national security. The need for peace in Ghana at all times should remain the focus of all development-oriented citizens and partners. In 2020, the NCCE received a grant from the European Union under the project entitled Preventing Electoral Violence and Providing Security to the Northern Border Regions of Ghana. In short, it's referred to as NOPREVSEC, the NOPREVSEC project, which flies against understanding of acronyms. Prior to receiving this grant, it is instructive to note that Ghana has put together, under the National Framework for Preventing and Countering Violent Extremism and Terrorism, also this referred to as NAFPC-VET. Today the acronyms are something else. And under this, the NCCE plays a critical role. This framework seeks to guide efforts to counter violent extremism and terrorism. And for the NCCE, our role is to carry out public education of information, and civic engagement to inculcate in the population security consciousness and awareness. Under NOPREVSEC, the Commission therefore undertook a risk or threat analysis of violent extremism to inform and guide public education that sustains peace and prevents pre- and post-electoral violence, and it is targeted in the 10 border regions of our country. The highlights of this study would be presented by Dr. Henrietta Asante-Sapong, Director of the Research, Gender and Equality Department of the Commission. So I would not speak to the contents of the study for now. This morning's dialogue seeks to interrogate the findings under the study and provide a launch pad for the Commission's activities under NOPREVSEC and as it complements to our role under NAFPC-VET. Ladies and gentlemen, the threat to our national security is not merely a perception. It is real. It is real from within, and it is real from without. Secessionist activities in Ghana, and particularly in the Transvaal Togoland, and indeed the emerging cracks amongst the Ga ethnic group attest to this. National insecurity is often characterized by violence, kidnapping, armed robbery, food insecurity, and environmental insecurity. And in Ghana, we witness some of these factors in our Constitution. And prepared in guarding our personal security, and by extension, our nation's security. To be so able, we must understand the concept of violent extremism and identify threats to our national security. Our commission, the National Commission for Civic Education, endeavors under both the NAF-PC-VET and the NOPREF-SEC to raise that requisite awareness and draw all Ghanaians on board, and acting with the national security apparatus to guard our country against infiltration of violent extremists, whilst building national cohesion within as one people, irrespective of ethnicity, religion, political affiliation, and social standing. I take this opportunity to thank the EU once again for being our continued and trusted partner and funding as the Commission on matters of such national importance and implication. I'd also like to thank our staff of the Commission and particularly commend our Directorate, Research, Gender and Equality, and the various research assistants that contributed in no small measure to make this survey a success. It is my hope that in the next couple of hours, where our distinguished panelists lead in the discussion of the highlights of the survey, the findings, and analyze same, it would stimulate a constructive and engaging national debate, not only in the media space, but in our workplaces, our churches, our mosques, our schools, for the vibrancy of our democratic development. Ladies and gentlemen, I wish you a pleasant morning, and I hope that this engagement continues beyond this room. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Madam. I would like to invite Mr. Christian Spoderick, Governance Cooperation Officer, who is a representative of the European Union delegation to Ghana, to give us his statement.
Madam Chair, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, in the end, all protocols observed. On behalf of our ambassador, who unfortunately could not join us at this occasion, I'm very pleased to have the opportunity to participate in the opening of this dialogue round, which will focus on violent extremism and which follows the submission of the report drafted in the framework of NOPREF-SEC program, funded entirely by the European Union. Now, violent extremism is one of the most significant global problems we face today, and a common challenge for governments and civil society all over the world. It is gravely undermining international peace and security. And no corner of the globe remains untouched by the rise of this phenomenon. It is also of increasing concern to the regional security agenda in West Africa and the Sahel. It is thus becoming a real and serious threat for Gulf of Guinea states, including Ghana, which is seeking new partnerships in enhancing the effectiveness of the response to terrorism and violent extremism. Now, as you are surely aware, the European Union has been a staunch supporter and a solid partner of NCCE in the struggle to ensure peaceful electoral process in Ghana and to provide the most vulnerable communities with necessary tools to resolve the disputes. Large-scale civic education, sensitization, and awareness-raising campaigns on violence threats, organization of various inter-party dialogue rounds on peace, tolerance, and armed violence, these are all essential to achieve these objectives. Nevertheless, this cannot be effectively performed without conducting a fully fledged analysis of the situation on the ground. Risk and threats assessments are centric to that end, and I am particularly happy that NCCE was capable to provide with those in a timely manner. And this was possible due to a very large network of contacts and a robust presence in all regions of Ghana, both of which have been trademarks of the organization. And I think confidence and trust building are key words here. For these very reasons, your analysts were able to reach out to border communities in over 70 districts of Ghana. Thanks to such a wide coverage, the outcome encapsulated in the report is quite impressive. The study is not a mere perception survey, but rather a document that provides with clear recommendations on future educational approaches and potential institutional responses to fighting the threat of violent extremism in Ghana. There is indeed a lot of work to be done in these areas, but I'm sure that NCCE, together with all the stakeholders identified in this report, will be able to transpose all valuable recommendations into action, just as it was the case with the research on matters of concerns to the Ghanaian voter analysis. Ladies and gentlemen, in the framework of NORPREVSEC program, the EU has earmarked €1 million to NCCE to coordinate joint efforts to sustain peace and prevent pre- and post-electoral violence. But this is just one piece of the puzzle. As from this year, and with the support of other partners, including security actors, the local NGOs and civil society included, the project will address various security threats in the most vulnerable northern regions of Ghana. It will contain the rise of violent extremism and prevent radicalization through enhancing key actors' capacities in early warning, conflict resolution, countering terrorism, and fight against transnational organized crime, while promoting, obviously, respect of human rights and the rule of law. And I think such a wide approach is key here. Without a response that is more agile than traditional security measures, and without a more comprehensive outlook of all that we do to support peace and prevent radicalization, this all may be doomed to fail. Just as one of the survey's respondents said, marginalization, inequalities, desperation and extreme poverty, religious intolerance, and identity crisis can also motivate people to engage in violent extremism. Every human being has a sense of dignity, self-respect, and self-pride. Every human, irrespective of whatever your background would have been. So as soon as you feel threatened, marginalized, underrated, degraded, and insulted, naturally you will want to fight back to end your deprived degradation. Ladies and gentlemen, Madam Chair, this is probably where the role of NCCE is so crucial. A well-educated and empowered society, immune to destructive narratives and capable of resolving its internal differences in amicable and peaceful manner, can move itself away from the dangers of radicalization and rise of violence. I am convinced that this is already happening, and that due to studies and analysis of this kind, we can only improve our methods in that regard. By congratulating you for the timely submission of this important report, I would like to wish all the participants a fruitful discussion. I hope that the outcomes of this very debate will serve better and more streamlined implementation of NCCE's projects. I can only assure you about the continued EU support that we are always ready to provide when peace is at stake. Ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, Madam Chair, I consider the dialogue open, and once again, a very big thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Spoderick. We now invite Dr. Henrietta Sanstisapon, Director, Research, Gender Inequality of the National Commission for Civic Education, to give us the highlights of the report. Thank you. Shall we welcome her?
Researchers, we stand anywhere. Madam Chair, Deputy Chairpersons, our panelists, ladies and gentlemen, I present to you the highlights of our study. Okay, so in terms of an outline, I'll give a brief introduction to the study, our objectives, the study approach that was employed. We go to our findings and then a conclusion. I want to begin by bringing to the fore the fact that violent extremism is real. And as early as just 4 days ago, our neighboring country, Burkina Faso, experienced one. The same country in 2016 also experienced this menace in a hotel. So it is real and it is close to us. I think the two pictures highlights what I have in words here. So Nigeria is also an example. 2019 1F study provides us with some statistics on extremist attacks in Nigeria. Mali, same. So Ghana has enjoyed some sustained peace and stability for some decades now. And we appreciate the fact that the menace is closer to us because our neighboring countries keep experiencing that. Indeed, in 2020, our matters of concern to the Ghanaian voter study highlighted violent extremism, election-related violence as topmost security threats to the peace of Ghana. Other studies by WANEP has also shown that indeed there are a number of extremist groups working within our sub-region. NCCE, as we heard from our chairman's remarks, has a critical role to play under our national framework for preventing and countering violent extremism. And ours is to effectively take up this mandate at the micro level. To do this in the most appropriate way, we need to understand what the gaps are. What do the people already know and what don't they know? So a rationale for this study, we went out to investigate further what we found in our 2020 survey regarding violent extremism and then other forms of violence escalating into violent extremism. We are also guided by our collaboration with the EU, the grant that was already talked about. The findings from this study largely will inform our education. So these are the very critical rationale for our study. Broadly, we investigated the risks and threats of violent extremism and other forms of violence in 10 border regions of Ghana. I'll mention the regions shortly. Specifically, we investigated the prevalence and knowledge of violent extremism in our study areas. We also tried to determine the vulnerabilities and risk factors associated with violent extremism. We examined existing institutional responses to the threat of violent extremism and examined modalities for NCCE's active engagement in fighting this menace. The study approach. So we had a descriptive design that's basically trying to find out what the situation is like, describe what is known and what is not known and what can be done using a mixed method approach. A mixed method approach because we did a little of a survey, quantitative, and we had to do a qualitative one with key institutions like those of you who are here, the police and the other critical security institutions. The regions 10, 5 northern, 5 southern. The northern ones were northern, upper east, upper west, Savannah, and northeast regions. The southern Volta, Otibuno, western, and the western north regions. 71 districts were selected based on 2 parameters. One, we picked districts that had a higher than the average percentage recorded on violence. In 2020, we asked about what people perceive violence to be within their respective districts. And we came up with the national average. For districts that had higher than the national average, we felt that they are more prone. So we selected those districts. Again, we had to look at border districts because certainly it is happening closer to us. Our participants, the primary ones, were the ordinary citizens, 15 years and above, and we also had to speak to representatives, senior level officers of the national, regional, and district security councils in all these regions and selected districts. We sampled 1,174 of our primary respondents or community members, and we had only one person declining to respond to our instrument. We had 42 secondary respondents of the national, regional, and district security councils. The distribution of sample was based on proportionate share to the country's 2020 projected population. What indicators were used to assess risk? We used 5 main indicators, and we looked at what has been done in other similar studies. So we looked at issues related to knowledge of the menace, existing socioeconomic conditions. I will expand this further. Counterterrorism mechanisms already in place, personal experiences and existing conflicts, and then border security issues. These have been used in similar studies, and we did same. We used a structured questionnaire for the primary respondents, and we used an interview guide for our secondary respondents. Of course, trained staff went to collect the data, and we analyzed the data descriptively and also tried to do bivariate analysis, assessing the relationship between the variables that we utilized. This is very brief on our respondents, their background. The mean age 38.4. The age group with the highest was 20 to 29 years. We had 57.1 married. And in terms of education, as high as 77.2 had received some formal education. Majority Christians, in line with the national picture. Secondary respondents, we had only 1 female, 41 males. We sent out letters looking for senior level officers, and maybe that's how the security system is, but we had only 1 female in the Volta region, and she was very, very, very helpful and instrumental. So our findings, I'm picking them based on the 5 indicators. What did we find on knowledge? We defined what violent extremism is by putting that into scenarios, because we went to ordinary citizens. If you go and read your big English, it may be too difficult for them. But it has been defined as advocating, engaging in, preparing, or otherwise supporting ideologically motivated or justified violence to further social, economic, or political objectives. We try to put this into scenarios to assess knowledge on this issue. So there were correct scenarios and there were incorrect scenarios. And for the correct scenarios, we had between 70 and 80% responding yes to the correct scenarios, the definition and the groups. Then for the incorrect, we had, again, an average of, to get about 50%, also saying yes to the incorrect. Makes it confusing. So on knowledge, yes, like I've already indicated, we had this high percentage, 81.3 on average. The more than half also affirming the wrong. What does this tell us? Key informants, on the other hand, like I indicated, these are senior level officers within our security agencies. They had better knowledge on the menace. So these are a few quotations from our key informant interviews. Because of time, I will not need to run us through. But it tells how our key respondents understand the menace. We also assessed knowledge on violent extremist groups. And here, if you look at the slides and the bars, you see that most people associate these groups to Boko Haram. The other groups are not that known in our country. Key informants, similar. Then, awareness on violent extremist acts. The act actually taken, not just about you knowing, but whether you have actually witnessed. We had as small as 2.2% saying that they are aware of the existence of the acts. Having witnessed, that was, almost negligible. We didn't have even more than 1%. You see, Boko Haram has 1.0. They are saying ever witnessed, but this is what they are telling us. But it tells us that for local people, this menace is almost non-existent in our part of the world. On witnessing, key informants, on the other hand, shed light on possibility of violent extremist acts happening in parts of our country. We have the example from Savannah region in these two quotations. Other forms of violence. It has been empirically proven that violent extremism can thrive through other forms of violence. So we assess their knowledge on other forms of violence, and we had chieftaincy disputes coming as the top. And we had close to a little over 40% saying yes to the fact that some form of violence is happening within their districts. On indicator 2, looking at socioeconomic and political as well as religious factors, shortened as PEER, we found that people will engage or support violent extremism due to the following: either to fight corruption, they are unemployed, they want to gain power, to fight injustice, or to respond to some underdevelopment. So these are socioeconomic factors that could also lead people to engage in violent extremist acts. The youth, similar to what has been found in other studies, our respondents perceive the youth as those who are likely to engage in violent extremist acts. Key informants, the same. On our third indicator, which is anti-terrorism mechanisms in place, we had 1 in 5 of our study respondents aware of district-level strategies to fight violent extremism. And what I have in the boxes are some mechanisms in place. What are these assemblies are doing? They're engaging traditional leaders. There's frequent security patrols, particularly around our borders, along our borders, sorry. And then we have mounting of more security checkpoints, among others. Key informants shared similar views, but our primary respondents were of the view, in terms of general overall assessment, that these measures that are in place are not very effective. There's something going on, all right, but it isn't that effective. At the regional level, with our Likert scale, we had the highest saying that these interventions are somewhat effective. In other words, what is happening is not too effective. The fourth indicator, looking at existing conflict, we found that past experiences with acts of violence can also contribute to violent extremism. But most of our respondents had never engaged in any form of violence. A very small number, 3.5%. And they did so to demand for their rights. Conflict, we had 42.7% of indicating that conflicts have resulted in violence in their areas. And certainly it tells that some form of violence which lingers for so long will serve as a basis for violent extremism. The fifth indicator, looking at our borders, from our key informants, the finding was that our borders are generally porous. On ease of entry, we had 42.5% saying that it is very easy for individuals to move into our country, with only 5.4% saying that it's very, very difficult, not even 10%. So our borders are indeed porous. What is this telling us overall? On the first indicator, that looking at socioeconomic and political conditions, we have found that yes, in Ghana there exists some of these conditions. Ghana is a youthful population, and the youth are likely to be, not the youth are the ones that are known to be used for these acts. On counterterrorism, we found that measures or mechanisms in place are not too effective, so something needs to be done. On knowledge, there was contradiction. If you have right scenarios, wrong scenarios, and almost half are saying that the wrong scenarios are violent extremism, then there's limited knowledge on even the menace as a whole. And on experiences, conflicts still exist and persist in some of our border regions. As for the porous borders, I think it was obvious. We need to work on that. What are institutions doing? We have the police service. This is from our key informants, and they outlined what they are doing generally. They are there to prevent crime and protect lives and property. We had our traditional leaders also telling us in brief their contribution. The National Peace Council is also working to also educate the public to be security conscious. Our assemblies are also doing a lot. The district security councils are there, and they are also trying to collaborate to stem this nip this in the bud, but there's more to be done. We assess briefly the level of trust for our security agencies. We had more than 50% having a higher level of trust, but also an equally higher proportion, almost 43%, having low trust in our security services. It is positive, but there's still room for improvement. How should NCCE support in this fight? This was a question that we posed to our primary respondents and the secondary as well. We were advised or admonished to adopt and intensify community-based educational approaches. I think from NCCE, from those of us in NCCE, we know that some of these things we are doing, but we are to intensify. So to engage different groups. And the issue of more staff being recruited to support, it was an interesting one, but it came up and they felt that an issue like this requires that, especially in our border regions, we have enough staff in those offices to do a good job in terms of education. Communication, we pose this question as well. From the perspective of the people, the radio, community information centers, and television should be the topmost media outlets that we should use in reaching them with education. And we should collaborate closely with traditional authorities, MMDAs, youth groups, religious groups, CSOs, and others, women's groups. We're already working with some, but we have to collaborate closely with them on this. Overall, suggestions. We should provide sustainable, for government, the respondents called for jobs. If young people have no jobs, they are likely to be used for this. And then resourcing security agencies so that they can do their work better, among other key suggestions. These were the major suggestions that were given by our study respondents. So conclusion, yes, we are not immune to violent extremism, even though we are enjoying some sustained peace. There's knowledge gap on the menace. terrorism, violent extremism. Unemployment is an issue. It could lead young people to engage in such acts. And then we need to foster or deepen collaboration. We also need to appreciate that public education is critical in the fight. All in all, this study provides very useful information to guide our work as a commission and also for particularly our security agencies in fighting violent extremism. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Asante Sapon. I think we'll defer all questions when we get to open forum so we can move on with the program. At this juncture, I would like to invite Mr. Samuel Asari Kwamwa to launch the research report so that we can move into the dialogue. Deputy Chairman, Operations, National Commission for Civic Education.
Thank you, Madam. Let me stand on the existing protocols to do this quickly, since I'm told time is virtually running out on us. The findings of the risk analysis survey report so far has been an eye-opener to those of us here, at least. And those on the streets, those in their offices and homes, how do they take violent extremism? Do they see it as something that is very far away or something that is non-existent? I think as we gather momentum with public education on this project, the answers must come. And the answer, I think Madam Chair raised it, and Christian also raised it, that it is so close to us, so close to us. So on this note, distinguished panelists here, Madam Chair, and dear participants, on behalf of the chairman of the commission and on my own behalf, I declare this survey, which is on risk analysis on violent extremism, conducted by the National Commission for Civic Education, duly launched.
Thank you very much. We'll now move on to the panel discussion. That will be led by our own Mr. Samson Ladia Yenini.
Thank you very much, and thank you to all of you here in the auditorium and all of you who are watching and listening to us on your superstation Joy 99.7 FM. That's your station for discerning listeners, and those of you joining us on the JoyNews channel on multi-TV. As you may be aware, we are streaming live on the social media handles of these media, including those of the NCCE. Once again, I'm Samson Ladia Yenini, and I'm privileged to moderate once again the National Commission for Civic Education's very important national dialogue series, and this time round on violent extremism in the country, analyzing the risks and threats. Our guests or panelists for this discussion will be Kojoma Tor Awono, Director, Center, Counterterrorism and Fusion Center at the Ministry of National Security. Also, Dr. Festus Kofi Obing is Senior Researcher at WANEP, West Africa Network for Peace Building. And Emmanuel Soate is Researcher, Institute of Criminology, University of Cambridge, in the UK. A round of applause for our guests. Now, as you listen to the presentation, you would have heard that there is a certain knowledge gap, and at the same time, you would have heard the assertion that the assemblies are doing a lot, quote unquote, doing a lot to educate and alert citizens about the risks and threats of violent extremism. I suppose that the NCCE is seeking to be charitable to these organizations. Otherwise, please share your experience with us. Apart from what is happening at the NCCE, can you tell us of your experience of being educated and alerted about violent extremism at the district assembly? Are they really doing this work? Let us know if you can testify to that. Now, I'll start with the National Security Ministry's Director of Counterterrorism Center. And all my guests, the irrebuttable presumption is that all of you have read the survey report. So, how important is this survey report to you, Mr. Awono, and why should we have it?
Thank you, sir. And thank you for all the audience for having me here. The survey, to my mind, is a collaboration to the work that we are doing at the National Security. The government of Ghana has come out with this framework for preventing and countering violent extremism and terrorism. This framework contains the government's approach to fighting terrorism and violent extremism. And as part of our outreach program, we distributed this framework to many organizations, as well as the RISEX, DISEX, and others, as well as other documents, for them to be informed about the nature of violent extremism and what they will do. Among the government strategies as 4 principles for fighting terrorism, and these are based on prevention. As part of the prevention, the first part is creating education and awareness to the people that this matter is very, very relevant to the country, because terror is very close. Like journalists, when the information is far away, we don't mind it. We think that, people think that terror is far away from us. When you hear Mali, when you hear Burkina Faso, when you hear about Niger, Nigeria, but recently you've heard about Cote d'Ivoire, which is very close. And we are telling our Ghanaians that the menace is very close to home. Thank you.
Right. Dr. Kofi Obeng, we have done a research on 1,200 almost. Is that size good enough to give us an indication of the risk and threats? And for those of you who may think that terrorism is too far away from us or violent extremism is too far from us, I've just spoken to Mr. Awono, and I'm now speaking to Kofi Awono. Yes.
All right. Thank you very much, and thank you, NCCE, also for the invitation. I think that under the current circumstances, that is COVID, and for the NCCE to be able to do this survey within 10 regions, border regions across the country, I think they deserve some commendation. But having said that, I mean, if you look at the focus areas, they are different from the dynamics in other areas, especially the semi-urban and urban areas. And they clearly indicated the focus areas of their research. And so I think under the present circumstances, is adequate. The only concern I had about was the key informant interviews, which had just one female interviewed. That was my only concern, because when you take violent extremism, women play a very key role as perpetrators and also as peace builders. And it is important that we get the voice of women when we are discussing these matters.
It's interesting you say that, because we thought at all the times that women were rather the victims.
No, women are also perpetrators.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Now, Emmanuel Soate, the top 4 border regions that are more likely to have an awareness or identify a threat are not endowed. We're talking the Volta, the Upper East, and the West. These are the places in the northern region. I just mentioned the industrious son of Ghana who lost his life, Professor Kofi Awono, through terrorism. We know that the target is often not in the deprived communities. They look for city centers. They look for national installations. They look for the malls, so to speak, the bigger places where everybody goes. So, this is not good, right?
Yes, thank you for having me. Let me take a step back on the methodology. And when they gave me the paper, that was the first thing I looked at. I looked at how the research was conducted, in terms of sample, how the data was gathered in terms of the ethical consideration. I look at analysis of the data, and what he said was very true in terms of having just one female out of the key informants. But sometimes you might not necessarily blame the institution, because, for example, you're interviewing NCCE, you're interviewing people from particular institutions. You tell them that, can you give us X number of respondents to respond to our survey, or we need this number of people to be interviewed. The institutions will appoint people not knowing that the other ones also are appointing the same gender or otherwise. So sometimes you can exonerate the institution.
So my question is, the people who are massing up at our malls and in the city centers are gathering in the great masses are not the ones that are most likely to tell that here is a risk. Rather, it is the deprived regions.
Okay, wait. A number of things you've said that are not generally true, that terrorists just attack city centers. It's not true. They start from sometimes the periphery. It depends on the context. It depends on the type of terrorist group you are talking about. Some will start from the weak side of the state. If weakness here means the lack of maybe the military. Okay, so they might start from there and start gaining ground. That's one strategy. There are some who start gaining ground in a country X, and then as they are becoming more prominent, prominence here is defined to mean the resources means intelligence, ability to put together IEDs, ability to get weapons, and then sometimes they attack other countries just to make a statement. So it is not always true that they start from the city center. In fact, if you study guerrilla warfare, it's always started from the bush, so that is not true. The other thing is that when it comes to selecting your sample, normally qualitative research is not to generalize. Normally in qual, you want to understand the situated meanings of particular issue. So the depth is more important than the breadth. If breadth means having a sample size that you can generalize, that is more quantitative. They use mixed method, and the idea of the mixed method is to make sure that you cover the back of each other. In terms of the sample, the 1,100, you can have thousands, but once it's mixed method, unless they are telling you that they are generalizing all the results, then you can attack them from the perspective of the qual. But other than that, from the quant, other than that, the qual, repeating myself, is to understand the situated meaning and subjective, so you don't generalize. Okay.
Right.
Then the other thing that you talked about, the appropriateness of the research participant or respondents. It is true that it depends on the research question and what you intend to achieve. And when you look at the research questions and you look at the objectives, you can then attack the methodology. But if you look at the research questions as they had put it out and the respondents, I think that one of the research questions was addressing border communities. Then it is right what they did. Unless you think that when you are prioritizing respondents, you should start from city center because you are dealing with a particular terrorist group who have over the years, I don't want to use a heavy word, who have over the years shown that they have a particular tactic. Because you need to understand the strategic and the tactical, operational and the tactical. Then you can say that, okay, this group, this methodology is appropriate because they attack from the borders, and so the research looks at particular terrorist group. Or this terrorist group, the history shows that they always start from the city center, and so the research participants are not appropriate.
All right.
But now I think that they are right.
Mr. Ono, I'm sure that the national security would have interpreted the issue as in the religious issue of a Muslim girl not being allowed to fast by way of observing their religious, right. You would have interpreted that to mean a potential for religious explosion, having followed what the leaders of the two Christian and Muslim groups were saying on the back of that. Now, here's a point for which I refer to that. Most of the participants are familiar with acts of vigilantism, certainly acts of extreme violent acts. They are familiar with student vandalism. They saw KNES's students vandalize vehicles and buildings. They have seen even SHS students do similar things. They have seen vigilante groups, until they were banned, act with such impunity that threatens even our democracy. Now, they were unable to be precise to define what violent extremism is. Help us. What is it, and what's the threat?
Right. Violent extremism has been, the phenomena is with us. The UN has attempted to define it, but they couldn't because of country-specific interpretation of the act. But the shortest form of definition which anyone can use is using extreme force or harm to support one's demands for something. So if somebody uses unlawful harm to advocate for something, that is terrorism, to my mind. Any form of violent or unlawful harm to force for something is terrorism.
Dr. Obing, less than 1% have experienced or witnessed this. Of course, like I said earlier, they are very familiar with land guards who are making...
That is terrorism. Right. That is terrorism. Armed robbery is terrorism. Right. Rape is terrorism. They are always terrorism. We don't have to wait for them to become genocide. We don't have to wait for them to become mass murders. That before we call it terrorism.
Right. Dr. Obing, in the right sense of extreme violence,
yes,
in the nature of terrorism,
yes,
is there a real threat to Ghana for which we must be doing anything? I want Dr. Obing to respond to that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I think before I move to your question, we need to be very mindful of how we define the terms, because how you define it determines the approach you use to deal with it. Mm. And in most cases, the difference between extremism, violent extremism, terrorism is the intention to cause harm or coerce government to pursue a particular objective. So we need to be very mindful of that. And then back to your question. Whilst Doug was presenting the findings, I was just asking myself that all these factors that she mentioned are prevalent in the Sahel region. They are in Nigeria, almost all the countries that I personally have done research on these issues have these factors as drivers of radicalization, violent extremism, and terrorism. So why is Ghana different? Why is it that Ghana has these factors and yet We've not experienced the kind of violence experienced in other places. And it comes to one critical factor. Maybe we have some resilient factors that we need to look at. And having said that, nobody knew that after 2012, when Akim, Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, took advantage of the political situation in Mali after the coup, will extend their operations to Burkina Faso, to Niger, and Boko Haram, when it started in Nigeria, nobody knew it would go to Chad and Cameroon. And if you look at the trajectory of extremism and terrorism within the Sahel and the Lake Chad Basin, you see that there is a gradual expansion in terms of operational areas and all that. And the coastal regions in West Africa are one of the areas that most of these extremist groups want to extend their activity, because it gives them access to a lot of things, like arms, like funding through transnational organized crimes and all that. And Ghana is not immune from that. And that is why I think taking a preventive approach is quite important. And that is also one of the things I like about the NCCE report, because it gives us early warning data, which will then help in terms of the collaborative efforts between the different agencies to deal with the problem.
Mr. Soate, we have laws that criminalize the various acts that are manifested in violent extremism. So the security agencies, the police, and the rest of them are supposed to be dealing with this, because that's what they are paid for. If there are violence during elections, unfortunately in the last election about 5 people died, but it's not particularly linked to violent extremism, I don't know how you will look at that, because the act of violence leading to the deaths appear to be attributed to the security agencies rather. You have land guard activities that are also criminalized, and now even recently more properly criminalized in a new law. That's the job of the security. Why should this education and an awareness by the citizens be important?
Okay, let me once again take a step back. Your question on violent extremism. When you look at the findings from NCC, they have a working definition, because some terminologies can be so amorphous that it conflates different perspectives, different philosophies. So I think for them to cocoon themselves from any epistemological criticism, they decided to have their own working definition. So if you look at the document, they clearly define from their perspective what violent extremism means, what counter-terrorism means, what terrorism means. So if people are interested in the particular definition they had used, they're referring to NCCE. I'm assuming without admitting that they will get this document. The other thing has
go over
to
that for us.
Okay, sure. So violent extremism, the justification, support, and use of violence to achieve a goal, normally political, social, religious, or ideological. Do you want terrorism, or people read it?
That's enough.
Okay, so that is it. Now your question, isn't it the job of the security? There is the narrow definition of security that in the Ghanaian parlance we say the Bugatti Kirifi type of thing. The old notion where you think that it is the arrest, it is the deterrence conceived to mean the military presence. It is showing the person where power is, and power almost coterminously is defined with hard power. But if you have an extended notion of security that encapsulates, like, well-being, jobs, inclusion, justice, then you realize that the actors are beyond just the hardcore security, if hardcore security is defined to mean the old notions of security. And that brings me to my next point. The president launched the National Security Strategy yesterday. Now, if you read that document, even the first part where the president was speaking about, he clearly had an extended notion of security and tried to show clearly that the document, first of all, is for 5 years, 2025, which is good, because then hopefully any new government will continue or reconfigure M&E. But then when you read the document, it shows that all the issues you've raised, injustice, discrimination, the need for national cohesion, It's not the job of the military. It's not the work of the police. NCCE comes in. In fact, in the document, the president talked about education as one of the key pillars. And education is defined as we know it, includes what NCCE would do. So I think that if we have a definition, repeating myself, that is broad enough, the human security perspective, that is not oblivious to the hard security, because you see, it's the balance that is important. You might go the soft approach, and you might have challenges. You also need a hard approach. And let me conclude on this note. Like the galamsey, which you touched on, that is some form of violence, depending on how you conceive how it is processed. I was in charge of research at the National Peace Council around 2005 to 7 or thereabouts. In 2000, when Cardinal Texan was the chair, Malvi Wahad Adam was the deputy. Peace Council did a study on this galamsey thing. I'm talking about 2007 and 2008. Cardinal Texan, Malvi Wahad Adam, Openi Ejekum, Professor Dote, Madam Georgina Baden, who used to be the president for NAT, Bishop Ludun, I think, also followed. And these things people are now talking about. We did a study, and it was pinpointed. It was surgical. It was the Western region. The idea was that it was going to be a precursor for a broader national, 2007. I sit down and I hear people talking about galamsey and state intervention as if it's something new. Not only that, 2004-05, I was on the early warning committee at the Ministry of Interior. The police then was represented by Patrick Timbila, who was then a chief supu, or supu, a senior supu. The military was Tetakuno. Tetakuno was then Lieutenant General. I was just told last week that he had died. Tetakuno was there. For BNI, it was William Bafo, and then I've forgotten RD. Now, these things you are talking about, we're doing it. Edwin Barnes was the chief director.
All right.
So I'm saying that, I'm trying to historicize your question to show that some of the things we find now, the way forward is not only the document, but the hindsight, the benefit of hindsight, and also making sure you have the right resources, the passion, the interest to address the issue. So yes,
Mr. Uno, you are the center of this. So I guess the essence of my question is, what's the role of the citizens when security officers are paid to check this and nip them in the bud?
When we talk about security, currently, as he refers to the president's thing, we are not doing regime security or anything security. We are doing what we call human security. Human security takes into consideration the holistic well-being of the people. Without security, there's no development. So, if you are doing your farming, and the territory that you are doing your farming is not secure, are you sure that your products will come to the market? If you go and buy a piece of land around Bronhafo area, and you are near a place where some people call it dollar power, and people are doing what you call it galamsey there with arms and others, do you think that your cocoa or your farm will be okay? You have to help the state agencies with the necessary information that there are undesirables around this territory, so that we all work in concept to get those undesirables out of that place. If you are at the market at Abugbulushi, and you realize that there are some people who are using a space in Abugbulushi for unhealthy issues, or terrorism can make a place in the market. If you listen to the Saturday's issue at Sohan in Burkina Faso, the terrorists jumped, and the first place they attacked was the market. How are our markets protected? When I was in Niger, they attack most of the time the marketplaces. They also became highway robbers. They know that this road from Accra to Kumasi, there are so many people going. They will cross the road and do whatever they will do. They collect money, phones, and others from all these people. If these things are happening in your territory, then you should know that terrorists are already in the territory.
So how do they do they identify the threat so they can assist the security organization?
Of course, if you are living in a community and you know the youth and some people who are not of the community come and start with some unnormal behaviors, of course you should tell the security. Of course, whatever community that you are living in, new arrivals or people who are becoming radicalized should be reported for the necessary things to be looked at.
Great.
Don't say that the person is mad, don't mind him. Don't say that, oh, I'm in an area, some people have come saying that they are refugees from Burkina Faso, and you allow them to live there. Allow the security people to vet the people and know who they are.
Right. Thank you.
Don't say that he's my uncle's relative and others, so he's come and you accept the person over there.
Thank you very much. If you are just joining us on TV and radio, this is your Joy 99.7 FM channel and the Joy News channel on Multi TV. And my guests this morning are the very important national dialogue series of the NCCE are Kofi Obing, Dr. Kofi Obing of the WANEP, and I'm getting to him with my very next question because you find that in the report a very major threat is youth who are unemployed. I thought the focus would have been seepages and leakages within our borders that allow for people from the various places to enter. My other guest I'm speaking to, you just said a while ago, is Mauto Awono, who is Director of Counter-Terrorism and Fusion Center at the Ministry of National Security. And Emmanuel Sowate is Researcher, Institute of Criminology, University of Cambridge in the UK. So, why that emphasis on youth that are unemployed, more particularly being candidates for recruitment for violent extremism?
Okay, thank you. Because such youth are often frustrated and often in need of assistance. And so any opportunity to meet their livelihoods, they become easy prey to these violent extremist groups. And it is also so because if you look at all the areas that are experiencing violent extremism and terrorism, the youth constitute majority of the militants.
In other words, there is financial incentive in it?
Yes, there are financial inducement. I'll give you an example. You take Al-Shabaab. Between 2014 2015, when they were recruiting some of the Kenyan youth, for example, those who were unemployed, they were offering as much as $700, $1,000 a month, together with other benefits. And imagine somebody who has been unemployed for about 5 years or 6 years, given this opportunity. I mean, if the person doesn't have very strong social values, I mean, he will become easy prey to those financial inducements. You know, and if you look at our demographics, you see that the youth constitutes majority of the population, and most of the frustrated people are also within this age bracket. And that is why I think most people mentioned youth unemployment as a very important issue within when it comes to violent extremism. And the violent extremist groups also want people who are strong and who can actually fight. They don't want aged people who can who easily be affected by the kind of activities.
If you may pause for me, sorry, to get Mr. Awono to directly tell us what national security is doing about this, since you identify that it's a national security issue. But I will need you to explain to us later how that example is the best, because we know of the situation where at the KNUS, a Ghanaian student joined IS. It wasn't a question of unemployment. So there may be recruitment through other people who are not in need of work.
Yes.
We know that there are youth who are engaged in acts of vigilantism. There are youth who are engaged in land guardism. What is national security doing about this to avoid the threats that we see?
The national security, as I told you, there's a holistic or human security. You know how government has started with youth employment and other avenues to give the youth work. Because trying to engage the youth will prevent them from being easy prey for these organizations. You have to know that the organizations are not organizations of any riffraffs. Terrorism is non-state actors, and sometimes there are states behind the scenes. They have got intelligence, they've got money, and there's a lot of business interest behind them. Because when they overrun a country, they take all their resources, recycle them, and put them in their banks. So it's a very serious threat to our country. The youth are the future of the country. So it is important that the country should pay attention to them. Some of them are being radicalized through the social media. There are posts and others on it which invite them to join these groups. There are certain websites that tell them and glorify attacks that they've done and tell them to join this organization.
This policy you have just inaugurated, how does it answer this question?
What one?
This threat. The policy that was just advertised or inaugurated yesterday.
Yes.
How does it answer this threat?
Oh, we have got it in our pillars here, and we are taking steps, or we've taken steps to try and educate the youth. That is why to start with the first pillar, education and what? Awareness to all people involved, the youth inclusive. If you are a father and you find out that your children are going wayward and you are aware of these things, you know where they are getting towards. And you will help to let them be online. If there's a program on the television and others which may induce these children to get to this point, if you are a broadcaster, you will tell the people to remove that thing. Do you remember that in Ghana, there was a time there was an Al-Qaeda program on our television? Until 9/11 came and they redrew it. These are things these people have used over the years to get us. They didn't start only by coming to Mali. They started with Algeria. And when they failed in Algeria, they entered Mali. Their first thing that they do is that they come in and marry the women. So they become citizens.
All right.
And they have their attitude, their mind, and their strategies to get there. Right. When they get there, they create the fighting forces, which they call them the Katibas. So they come with Jenin, they come with Katiba Masina, they come with Al-Mabatoon, and they will it becomes snowballing, creating many, many things.
That's frightening.
Yes.
Now, Dr. Obin, you continue from where I truncated your presentation, and then my final question will come to Emmanuel Suate also about this education. And you find that a first most critical point, formidable approach has been taken by the NCCE, because in the framework for the prevention of these things, they are there. But they lack the information and the resources. How serious should government take that? And after him, we will come to you in the audience to also ask your questions. So, Dr. Obin.
So thank you. I think you made a very valid point in terms of whether it's only unemployment that lead the youth to violent extremism. And it raises the question of what are the multiple drivers that lead people to violent extremism. And unemployment is not only the factors that lead people to violent extremism. If you take examples from our own sub-region, there are youths who are forcefully conscripted by these extremist groups when they attack villages. There are those who join for their own security, especially those in the livestock business. Some of their cattle are stolen, and when they join these groups, they provide protection for them. There are others who join for religious reasons, and there are others who join for issues of injustice, issues of retaliation, and all that. But the emphasis on unemployment is important because of the, it's one of the prevalent issues that the violent extremists exploit within the region to recruit the youth into its fold, giving it some sense of identity. Because, you see, in all the areas where they attack, sometimes there's weak government presence, and so they come in to offer that alternative to the government. They try to let the youth understand that the government has neglected them because the government is supposed to provide for the welfare services of its citizens. They try to manipulate those youths about government inability to provide for their needs, provide for their safety, and through that they are able to manipulate them to join their fold. And that is why the issue of unemployment is quite critical when it comes to dealing with issues of...
Seeing that this dominates this research as a major threat, from where you sit, is the state doing enough, and what should it be doing?
I think so far there have been some policies, but I think we can do more. Because if you look at 10 years or 15 years ago, we didn't have a lot of private universities, for example, where people come out every year. We had very few universities, very few schools, but over the years, that has grown. And every year you have so many people coming out of these schools. And when they come out, they are not producing their own jobs. They expect to be employed by the public service and the private sector. But the private sector also doesn't have the strength to accommodate all these youth. The government, the public sector is also choked. So a lot of them find themselves in very difficult situation. And most of the time, somebody who has just finished school, you ask the person to be an entrepreneur. With what money? With what is the person going to use? Okay. How is the state providing opportunities for such people to be able to, if they want to be entrepreneurs, to be able to do that? So I think the states need to do enough in terms of creating the enabling environment, not only in the public sector, but also in the private sector, to allow a lot of these unemployed youth to do something for themselves.
Mr. Soate, in the framework for the prevention of violent extremism, we have various other state institutions that are being assigned various roles. And the NCCE perhaps is assigned the most important role: education, dissemination of information. And I suppose by this research, we can say for sure that they have at least educated 1,200 people to be alert, to know, identify what these are, and to report where necessary. But the NCCE that we know, and reading from the report, what should the state be doing to ensure that they are better empowered with information and resources?
Okay, thank you. I'll take a step back again, but let me start with this answer. In terms of educating the 1,173 respondents, there were 74 one declined. And then there are 42 in-depth interviews with key informants. Okay, I wasn't part of those who trained the research assistants, so I don't know whether they were told that after asking the questions, you educate them. I don't know, so I can't conclude.
The process of answering the questions in itself brings an awareness.
Yes, it does. But if you are educating somebody, it takes it's a different capital. It goes beyond just, telling the. I wasn't there. I don't know. I know that education is a very nebulous term. I understand your point. I'm not disagreeing with you. But I'm saying that from where I sit, I cannot say that the education that I assume you have in mind in this document was achieved in the field when respondents were engaged. I cannot say that.
So if you agree that their role is the most important, education and dissemination of information to assist all of us, how can we get them to do it and do it well?
I'll answer that question. But you asked the question here on the national security strategy. Now, I had the document late last night, but let me read the second strategic objective under sustainable development, and I quote, "The strategic objective of the sustainable development sets out Ghana's priority in this regard. The development of the health of the Ghanaian capital, with emphasis on good health, maybe because of COVID, on good health, education, skill training, and entrepreneurship." And so your question about employment is addressed in the strategy. And then the other thing you asked about the individual. In the same document on page VII, I quote, "The national security strategy recognizes the individual Ghanaian citizen and his community as the primary reference objective of national security plan and policy."
Moving that from the paper onto the real work, the NCCE, how can it do this work?
Yes. Now the research is clear on that. One, the means of reaching out to the constituents. I was struck that when you look at the respondents, majority, according to the report, were between the age of 20 and 29. And I thought that social media would be a key channel for reaching out to them. But when you look at the finding, it said that television and radio. Now, I quickly went to the research instrument to see whether it was closed-ended or open-ended, to see whether social media platform was there. But I think that was striking. So one thing that I can answer, if the means television, radio, although they are young, is antithetical to what you might think. The other thing that the research has shown clearly, you don't just lecture, isn't it? You develop your research content. So this is the objective. These are the reading list. These are the things that the people need. And I think that the findings are clear in terms of the knowledge gap, what type of knowledge gap. You ask the question about what the individual citizen can do, and that is where they have a role to play. And also, another issue you raised about the role the individual can play in hard security. So, for example, if you're educating people you have Boko Haram, because different terrorist groups have different operations. So when you're educating your citizens, it depends, it's contingent on the type of threats that you have and the organization. And the level. There are certain constituents in your country that you educate them on the strategic. There are others you advise them on the operational tactical. So, for example, you might have people placing IEDs in markets and detonating and killing people. So at the tactical level in Ghana, when you're educating people, you know that when you look at the trajectory or the modus operandi of Boko Haram, very often they use IEDs that they place at marketplaces. How did they place them? In black polythene bags. So at that level, you're interested at the tactical. And when you're educating the people, you educate them that don't be accepting packages that you don't know the content. So the education is also, repeating myself 3 times in 1 minute, is contingent on the type of group that you are dealing with and at the level that you want your individuals to participate.
Thank you very much. And you have been listening and watching us on your Joy News channel on Multi TV and Joy 99.7 FM on streaming live also on the social media handles as well. This has been the National Dialogue Series of the NCCE looking at violent extremism. And as NCCE always does, it has conducted a research, and it's on the back of the research that we are having this conversation. I'm now going to invite members in the audience to give us your questions or contributions, and for the purposes that the TVs don't have to turn to catch you, please come this way. There's a microphone over here. Be very quick with your question if you can. In some 30 seconds, if you can ask your question or make your contribution. Please move forward, and let's have your questions for our panelists as well. Now, whilst we get people coming around, I can't see anybody coming yet. Whilst we get people come around, Mr. Wono, if you are talking about, the research is talking about less than 1% that have witnessed this, what's the cause for alarm?
It's great. Because 1%, we hope that those 1% will continue with the message. But I think the threat is very big, and we need a lot of people to tell people about this matter. So 1%, well, I don't think that is encouraging. But if the 1% will go on with the message. Thank you.
All right. Yes, please introduce yourself quickly and your question or contribution.
Okay, I'm Isaac Socrates Mensah from the National Cybersecurity Center. I would want to make a contribution to the discussion. My contribution is the role of the internet and by extension social media in this very important discussion. The internet has become a tool for which these terrorist groups or organizations are using. First, for recruiting, and then also two, for communication. You realize that even in Ghana, I can say about 50% of data indicates that about 50% of our population are on the internet. And also around 27% are on social media, for which about 90% of them are the youth. So if we are spending, and also data also indicates that Ghana is the 9th country in the world with time spent on social media. So it means that our youth are spending quite a lot of time on social media. But the question is, who are these? Who are we engaging with? How are these terrorist groups are recruiting and are also employing the use of apps that have encryption, like WhatsApp, like Telegram, to communicate, in which law enforcement agencies cannot read what they are talking about.
So you are from the Cybersecurity Center?
Yes, please.
So what should youth or people who are engaging through the internet, what should they look at to avoid, such indoctrination or contact with the circumstances that will lead them to become violent?
Okay, so in terms of what the center is doing, there are 4 main things that I would want to talk about. First is the Cybersecurity Act, which is going to criminalize some of these activities online. The second one is the National Cybersecurity Center is also doing a lot of awareness and capacity building in that respect, where we are visiting schools and organizations to discuss some of these things that are happening on the internet. Another thing is that most of these youth, sometimes, even when they encounter some of these things, do not even have where or who to talk to. So the National Cybersecurity Center also launched the point of contact through which you can reach the National Cybersecurity Center to discuss or to even talk about some of these things.
So my question was, if you can end on that, one thing you will tell the youth listening to us who are engaging through internet, what is it that when they see, they should be alarmed and begin to take action?
Okay, so the youth are discussing, talking with a lot of people they do not know. If someone you meet on the internet starts discussing things of this nature, okay, to you on the internet, it is an alarm or it is a trigger for you to alert authorities on this. You can even walk to a police station. This is what someone is discussing with me online. They bring up some of these discussions just to bring your mind on it. Then they start grooming you towards some of these things. So it is all about looking out for these kind of discussions
Thank you.
Promoting violence and all that online.
Thank you very much. Let's have our next questioner or contributor give his. And we want to thank our radio audience listening to us via Joy 99.7 FM very much as radio breaks to begin with the news. And the Joy News channel television will also break shortly. Thank you also very much. You can continue watching us on the social media handles where we are streaming on the NCCE handle as well. Yes, please, your name and question.
Chief Superintendent Eugene I, Ghana Immigration Service. Thank you, NCCE, for this research at the peripheries. I will plead that you come to the core where the issue of land guard is prevalent. I think it dates back when we lost some police officers, some military personnel have been attacked. I will request that there should be some kind of reward system for the police service so that individuals who research, intercept, successfully prosecute these land guards